arrived in Iraq to a scene of increasing mayhem. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq. His terrorist tactics were so cold-blooded, almost psychopathic in their violence, but effective. By 2006, our task force had gotten so good that I was utterly confident we'd get Zarqawi. Then we got a lead. We see him, we got him in our sights. We're gonna capture this guy. And then we get word that one of the helicopters is broken. He's gonna slip through our fingers yet again. The task force commander below me came to me and he said, I want to drop a bomb on the house.
There is a flight of F-16s from the United States Air Force. They have now been told where the target is.
I'd spent 3 years establishing a model that we'd come to call a team of teams, connecting separate teams into one powerful, unified organization, building a culture on the battlefield where soldiers felt more empowered to make decisions on their own. You need to let them do it. In that critical moment, I just had to watch and wait. In the military and the business world, the old rules are dead. Everything's changing at lightning speed. We have weapons and systems that simply go faster than they ever did before. The speed at which we can produce new products, bring them to market, upset competitors, changes the very nature of business. Organizations that aren't adaptable are like armies on the battlefield that haven't changed. They lose, and eventually they go away. I'm a retired 4-star general and commander of U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan. I commanded JSOC, the nation's most elite special operations forces. I deployed operators from the Navy SEALs, the Army's Delta Force, U.S. Army Rangers, and a range of other specialized units to push back al-Qaeda in Iraq and across the region. Many of the structures I helped establish, the adaptations to be more effective, are still in use today. Since retiring from the Army, I've advised Fortune 500 companies, taught at Yale, and advised leaders on risk. Under Armour, Bank of America, Intuit, Citibank, Airbnb, Pfizer, Anheuser-Busch. What I've discovered is that whether you're fighting terrorists or competing in the marketplace, the challenges are remarkably similar. Speed, coordination, and the ability to adapt faster than your opponent. From the battlefield to the boardroom, my job has always been the same, to build teams that win under pressure. Now, I want to share my playbook with you. So who should take this class? Well, anybody who wants to be more effective as a leader and a manager, or simply if you want your organization to be better and you know that you need to be a more effective part of that. I'll help you understand people, process, and culture to create a team of teams. I'm excited to teach you how to increase information sharing, strengthen collaboration, and empower execution. You'll learn that common purpose and trust form a foundation. My job wasn't to make every decision. It was to lead people who could. Most companies don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because their leadership playbook is out of date. This class will show you how to lead through chaos, break down bureaucracy, and win at wartime speed. You'll walk away from this class with a system, not just a strategy. I'm General Stan McChrystal, and this is Masterclass. My experience in Iraq, leading counter-terrorist forces, has shaped the way I think about leadership in every organization. I arrived about 6 months after the United States had invaded. I was responsible for American counter-terrorist forces across the entire region. I had personally felt that the invasion of Iraq was a mistake, but al-Qaeda was now there. The person who was operationally significant was a young Jordanian known as Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Al-Zarqawi's strategy was fairly straightforward. He would create this wedge between the Sunni and Shia, and he would also target Western coalition forces to force us out. But his tactics were really brutal. Direct attack on Shia civilians, car bombs, mortar attacks. People would be taken out of their homes and beheaded. What he was creating was this rage in his opponents. And when people rage, they often overreact. They overreact or they get scared into inaction. Either way, he gets what he wants. But Zarqawi's brutality was just one dimension. He was simultaneously building a networked organization that was outmaneuvering our own communications. They were leveraging information technologies, cell phones, commercial internet in ways that we simply hadn't anticipated. We had very expensive systems which would allow us to do things in a military sense, but in reality, they'd become informally but effectively networked. And surprisingly, they were more nimble and adaptive than we were. And so by the late summer of 2003, violence had started to increase. The United Nations headquarters was bombed. There were a massive number of car bombs going off in Baghdad and other cities every day. On the coalition side, I was struck by what seemed like disorganization. The Allied effort was well-intentioned, but it was almost entirely ineffective. Soon after I took command, I went to our base. That's also where we brought intelligence that we had captured. Often when a raid was conducted, the operators who went on the ground would take a garbage bag, documents and computers and phones. They would put it all in the bag. But because we didn't have enough translators or intelligence analysts, they took these bags of captured materials and they put them in this supply closet. When the interpreters have spare time, they start looking through this. Well, the problem with intelligence is that with passage of time, it's meaningless. All the things we're putting our people at risk of their lives to go capture, we're just essentially ignoring them, or the equivalent of throw them in the trash. For me, this was a light bulb moment. Our enemy was communicating better than we were. Learn before you lead. If you're going to change an organization, I think you start by looking in the mirror. You know, we always try to understand the marketplace. We try to understand our competitors, and often we don't spend enough time understanding ourselves. Get to know the organization. Go down and research it. Not just research it, get to know people. Get a sense of it. What it is, who they are, how it is, why it exists. What are the competitors doing? What's the strategic environment? What are all the things you'll have to take into account going forward? And then simultaneously let them ask you questions, because you'll learn a lot from the questions they ask, and then you ask them for their opinions. The pace in the world is accelerating dramatically. We'll never be the expert on everything.
There will be other people who know more than we do, and we need to ask them about it. In Iraq, that supply closet was a symptom of a much bigger problem. We had all these elite units, Delta Force, SEALs, Rangers, CIA, FBI, each excellent at what they did, but we weren't sharing information between them. Our enemy was networked, but we were siloed. To beat them, we had to become a team of teams. When we use the term team of teams, what I really mean is breaking down the walls between departments so information flows freely, decisions happen fast, and everyone sees the big picture. Instead of separate teams working on their own piece, you bring them together into a real team. This concept would become central to everything we accomplished in Iraq and everything I'll teach you in this class.
It seems like every war movie has a scene where somebody says, that's on a need-to-know basis.
It's being treated on a need-to-know basis.
I'm on a need-to-know basis.
You're on a need-to-know basis, and you don't need to know.
The fallacy with the need-to-know approach is you don't know who needs to know. Radical transparency is sharing information we didn't used to share with people we didn't used to share it with. What we need to do is push as much information down to the lowest possible level so that people understand the broader context. To put radical transparency into practice starts with a culture change. In Joint Special Operations Command, I started with this mantra that said, I want everybody to know everything all the time. Now, of course, that was impossible. But people knew that what I was trying to say was if we're all have as much knowledge as we can, we're going to function better. So we did something we'd never dreamed of before. We invited the entire command to the daily video call. Turned out to be about 7,500 participants every day. That was the place to find out what was going on. You learned not just what was happening in your small part of the fight, whether it's a function or geography, but across the region. Everyone in the command knew that if they were on that call that day, they were up to speed. They had a really good contextual understanding of what's happening. And then they could drill into their specifics. And so it created a momentum and it created a level of empathy which I had not predicted. You're seeing people from other organizations operating 1,000 miles from you, but you hear their problems, you see what they're going through. And suddenly you realize, hey, we're all in this together. And that turned out to be invaluable. And it connected everyone in the region, but it also connected every embassy in the region, CIA headquarters, State Department, all the things in DC, so that all the people who were critical to the fight but weren't geographically standing on the battlefield were just as connected as people who were. When we first started the large call with everyone, there was a lot of skeptics, and I get it, because people were busy.
They'd say, this is a waste of time. And there's reticence to share information.
Or to put out your opinion, particularly in a hierarchical military organization. So we had to break through that. In Iraq, we started to make it understood that the price of admission was contributing. It's bringing your information to share with ours. Most will start with the tendency to give a very short brief. Everything's good here, boss. You know, don't bother us. And so you have to ask questions that are probing. They don't have to be rude, but they can be leading questions that require them to truly explain something, not just to you, but to the wider command. And one of the great things when you do these often, people know that's the interaction, and they give up trying to give the very short, you know, we're good, don't ask any more questions, and they just expect that kind of conversation. And as we produced more and more information, as the task force got more effective, more people wanted to be a part of it because they saw the value. And then we hit a point where I think people who weren't in it realized they were missing a competitive advantage. It turned out to be the most efficient thing I've ever been involved in my career.
That's the dynamic in a civilian corporation I think we're seeking. People want to be there because they'll be better able to do their jobs. So how do you create that dynamic in your own company? Start by conducting a brutally honest assessment of your organization's communication gaps. Then hold meetings where sharing real information, including problems, failures, and honest updates, is required to participate. Let me give you an example. In 2014, after I left the military, my consulting group got the opportunity to work with Intuit, which is, of course, a software as a service company associated with financial products.
So you've been thinking about getting Quicken, the world's #1 selling personal finance software.
Intuit had been doing very well selling box-based CDs with their software on it, but increasingly they were losing out to cloud-based distribution of software.
Intuit CEO Brad Smith was facing a transition in the market. So he realized Intuit had to shift not just with the trend, but to get ahead of it. To do that, the company needed to unify the internal operations of their services like QuickBooks and TurboTax in what would become known as the One Intuit strategy.
So he brought us in to help look at how he could bring all the different parts of the organization into alignment, not just functionally, but emotionally. And so we did a combination of surveys so we could get a sense of the demographics and the perspectives being brought. But then we also followed up with targeted interviews of a large number of people. We found that when we try to understand an organization, find out what the people are thinking, and you can ask the right kinds of questions, the wisdom of the organization is extraordinary. Who are the people who are critical in terms of passing information, making decisions? Where are the bottlenecks? Now, what that gave us is the ability to map the organization and see exactly how it truly functions, And then across parts of the organization, as we map it, we can see those parts that are almost islands or peninsulas. They had a lot of good capability, but the reality is they were having a tough time making it work together, the different parts of the company.
Similar to my 7,500 person meetings in Iraq,
Intuit started holding regular video conferences with several hundred people at a time. They made a great effort to make sure everybody was getting the opportunity to participate, to share information, where the organization left those meetings better aligned than they came in. Ultimately, Intuit was very successful transitioning into the cloud era. And I think it was largely based on the One Intuit effort. And if we wonder what that was worth, Intuit increased its market capitalization from 18 billion to 29 billion in just 3 years.
everybody's heard me talk about it, then we'll see how we
I think that the relationship between team members, the camaraderie you create or fail to create, is really important for a team of teams model. Because the more you can build up that sense of connection to the organization, that sense of worth, if I make a suggestion, somebody will listen and somebody will take it seriously. That becomes very, very powerful. It's beyond just employee morale. It has to do with this sense of identification with the group. The objective of all this is what we call shared consciousness. Shared consciousness is a common contextual understanding of what's happening, what the organization's trying to accomplish. You can also give people a more holistic view of their own organization, a narrative that says, this is what we are right now. These are all the great things that are happening in this company. These are the strengths, and these are things that would help us move in the direction of where the company needs to be going forward. You know, the concept of a narrative is extraordinarily powerful in almost anything. We went over to do some work with an organization that was redoing the sewer system of the City of London. They were actually the first modern sewers in the world. They had a system in the 1850s or 60s when it was first created. It was cutting edge, but by the 2000s, it was not. And so they decided they were going to have to do significant upgrades to it. And one of the first things they did was they created a picture.
And it looked like a rendering of a river, and people were biking and walking along the park and Riverside, and then there's some buildings along it.
And they go, this is what we do. We are reconnecting London with their river. And if you think about it, it gives a sense of purpose to the members in the organization. This is what we are trying to achieve. It gives a sense of clarity to people driving around and they see construction sites. What's all this about? And you say, here's what we are doing. If you're in a small organization, there'll often be difficult times. You're trying to build that company. So that narrative often has to have both a reflection of the current reality and then the vision for the future. We need to try to simplify what we want people to do. We need to make it clear to them so that it is not intimidating or overwhelming. A vision for any organization ought to fit on one page, because people can't get their minds around 10 pages and a lot of detail. They want a narrative that they can understand, and you have to be able to describe that very clearly, but you also have to have behind that a reality to it. Because how many times do you go into organizations and they've got some sort of bumper sticker banners up that says this or that, but when you push on them, there's nothing behind it. And it creates cynicism inside the organization.
Once you have set the narrative, you then need to make sure that your teammates understand what it is you've asked them to do.
And the best technique I've seen for that is to brief them on what you want, provide a written document if possible, and then wait a short period of time and have them brief you back on what you asked them to do. Their brief back gives you an initial sanity check before people run off and do huge efforts and spend resources. This gets back to the military. We call something called commander's intent. And what you do is you get a mission to do some task, capture a hill. But then you get a paragraph written by the commander themselves that says, okay, here's what we're really trying to do. We're not trying just to take that hill, to have that hill. We're trying to take that hill to achieve this result writ large. And what that does is it allows people, as they're doing it, if suddenly capturing the hill isn't practical or too risky, they can say, what else could I do to meet the commander's intent? And commanders, leaders of all kinds in organizations need to be able to articulate that. And you'll find that this needs to be revisited fairly frequently because as conditions change, the outcome required or the marketplace or the environment or any other part of it changes, the entire rest of the organization needs to be sensitized. Alignment requires constant communication to be effective. If we think of a big organization that's complicated in the extreme, think of a nuclear aircraft carrier. It's got about 5,000 sailors on it, most of whom are very, very young. Planes are going off day and night, and a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old kids wearing colored sweatshirts are running it all. I mean, in reality, you wouldn't lend your car to them. But we've lent this nuclear aircraft carrier, and they do an amazing job for a couple reasons. First is the system has been designed so that the various roles are well understood. The second is they understand the larger picture. You've got a ship, you've got aircraft, you've got people, you've got all these things interacting as a whole, and those team members are schooled to understand how this organism functions. Once everybody's using the same playbook and they're excited about it, you need to make people feel empowered to make that vision a reality. Next, we'll talk about how to do that. But before we move on, remember, ask questions of someone lower in the hierarchy and make it someone you don't usually speak with. Try sharing information with your team that you've never shared before. Create a shared narrative. Your vision needs to fit on one page. Lastly, hold a meeting where you demonstrate radical transparency and see what happens. You become a leader the day you decide to become a leader. All that I'd wanted from my earliest memory to be an Army officer, to go to West Point, that was my dream, to be my father. He was a combat infantryman, and he'd gone to West Point. I entered West Point when I was 17 years old in the summer of 1972. My first 2 years, my grades were terrible because I didn't study, and my conduct was terrible because I misbehaved. In fact, I came within a hair's breadth of being evicted from the academy for demerits in my sophomore year. If I'd been thrown out of West Point, I would have been 18 or 19 years old at the time. I have no idea where I'd be right now, because all I ever wanted to be was a soldier. But as a plebe, I was struggling to find my place at the academy. They don't treat you with huge respect for the first year there, and that's intentional. But they constantly tell you you are here to be a leader. Now, that doesn't mean you go into a room and you automatically take charge because you're the leader. Leadership involves a set of characteristics and behaviors of maturity, of selflessness, of loyalty, of integrity, all the things that we like to see in people. And so you are encouraged to act like a leader in every situation that you can. Even if you are the third man in the last squad and all you're doing is following orders. That lesson on leadership from West Point stayed with me throughout my career. But it wasn't until I faced the chaos in Iraq that I truly understood what it meant. Real leadership isn't about having all the answers or making every decision. It's about creating more leaders below you. In today's environment, that's more important than ever. When we describe the top-down method of leadership, we tend to think of pyramid-shaped hierarchies. That was good when things were fairly slow-moving. If you were producing the same thing month after month, year after year, but when the target is changing, means that whatever you have to accomplish is changing. And so trying to adapt to a changing environment, changing marketplace, changing product requirements, requires this sensors out, which are your people out around the marketplace. So it's critical that the organization not try to be mechanical in a particularly fluid and complex environment. It's like playing pool. You rack up the balls, you get ready to break, and you may have a strategy, but there are so many complexities to this that when you hit it, you don't know what's going to happen. And so as an organization tries to deal with a complex environment, it has to have adaptability as a core attribute. Because whatever the environment is, whatever the competition is, you've got to be postured for that. Choke points are the areas within an organization where coordination breaks down and information or workflow gets stuck.
Remember the bags full of actionable intelligence, just sitting there with no one to evaluate what was in them? That's a choke point.
Choke points don't have to be intentional. An organization can have somebody who's responsible for doing something and they're just not able to do it.
Internally, people may be waiting on a particular decision before moving on to the next task.
You start to identify choke points in an organization where somebody's availability or their ability to respond just limits other people getting their job done. During the counter-terrorist fight in Iraq, we had this cycle, a targeting cycle. Find the enemy, fix them, finish them, exploit and analyze. And what we found is at any time, any part of that cycle could become the delaying factor or the choke point. And the key was being able to measure those things and quickly address whatever one is slowing you down. Choke points can be fatal for a company. The question is, what's the best way to fix it? Do you go and fix the specific choke point, or do you go after top-down management? I would argue you have to do both. But if you change top-down management into a better system, the choke points will be easier to address. We sometimes ask ourselves, how far down should we delegate authority to make decisions, even important decisions? What I used to tell people was delegate until you're uncomfortable and then go one more level. And the reason I say that is because all of us had the temptation to sort of hold things at our level because we know what to do and ultimately we'll be held responsible for the outcome. It can seem crazy to decentralize too far because you go down to people who don't have as much experience, maybe aren't as old, you don't know as well. But the reality is they are closer to the problem. Things are moving so fast. If you try to be top down, you're just slowing it down. You're just going through a formality. There's a great exercise we put people through called decision space. And what we do is we start at the top of an organization. We go to the CEO and we say, what decisions can only you make? And typically they'll say, I approve the budget, I develop the strategy, I do key hires. And then they'll try to slip in and everything else that's important. And we erase that off the whiteboard and we go, nope, that's cheating. Because a CEO of even a major corporation really only ought to have 3 or 4 decisions that only they make. And then the theory is every decision that is not specified to that senior person goes down. Now the next level goes through the exact same drill. And they see which ones can only they make. And then you push it down. Then people lower in the organization, they say, well, what freedom do I have to make decisions? And you say, everything that's not listed up there above you is automatically something that you can make a decision on. And it's liberating because they can see it in writing. They don't have to worry and ask the question. They know, therefore, if it's not enumerated there, I can do it. There's some great practical ways to put this into practice. If you are dealing with money, you can say any decision below a certain threshold can be made below this level. Or you can say, if somebody wants to hire somebody, maybe you can hire people up to a certain level in the organization. There's a great idea that was put in place in some hotels. And what they've done is they've told employees they have the authority to spend up to a certain amount. One I read about was $3,000 to fix any customer's problem. And you say, wow, maybe a hotel desk clerk is going to spend $2,500 to make a customer happy, and that's a lot of money. But the reality is they found that maintaining customer loyalty was so valuable that it pays off. Also, they found that empowering the employees gives the employee a sense of responsibility and ownership. How frustrated are we when we go to a desk clerk and they say, I'm sorry, it's just that way and I can't do anything about it and it's late at night and there's nobody I can call. And how elated you are when the person says, I tell you what, I'm going to take off that room tonight because for whatever reason. And you're really impressed by the level of responsibility that person can take. Leadership often misuses guardrails in trying to hold on to control. Think of a company who suddenly goes into a difficult economic period. One of the first things they do is they constrain all travel, or any travel above a certain amount of money has got to be approved at a high level. That has the effect of stopping people from traveling or buying certain things or engaging contractors. All of those, in one sense, are a good idea because they can constrain spending, but they have an unintended effect. One of those is a lot of the travel you may need to do business development or sales doesn't happen. The second is the people below lose their authority to innovate and execute. And suddenly they will do what you tell them because you've controlled all of the tools that they have. And so I would say that if you need to do that in a crisis for a limited period of time, I could buy into it. But if you try to do it routinely, you're really going to hobble the organization. Create sensible guardrails, but don't use them as an excuse to control decision-making. By the fall of 2004, about a year into my command, it was obvious that the task force we'd created was becoming really good. As you start to communicate more, as you start to give trust, as you start to put people together for difficult things, slowly but surely relationships build. And then communication starts to be based not just on strict process or legal requirements, but it becomes more organic. At the time, I wouldn't have described it this way, but we were essentially turning the organization on its side or on its head. Because instead of people being limited by going up and down the traditional vertical chain of command, they were empowered and encouraged to go laterally, to go diagonally, to go wherever needed. And suddenly people felt like they were part of the network, not part of a siloed organization within a rigid structure.
By 2004, we had rebuilt how we operated. Daily briefings, shared intelligence instantly. Everyone saw the full picture, and people were empowered to make decisions. We weren't separate units anymore. We were a team of teams. But our ultimate test was still to come. So let's review. Identify one communication choke point where you work and figure out how to unblock it.
Think about one thing you can do to be less top-down in your own management style. Take something you would normally handle yourself and delegate it to someone else. When the 9/11 Commission published its report with an exhaustive investigation of what had happened, what they found was all the information that was needed to stop the attacks existed inside the U.S. government. We just were unable to connect the dots. One of the examples, of course, is hijackers went to flight school inside the United States to learn how to fly the kinds of airplanes that they planned on hijacking. Now, if we think about the impact of that, official American agencies and individuals had possession of that information, but for some reason, either the culture of the organization or processes or classification or just habits, that information was not shared, even though it was important information about a potential threat from terrorists. The idea of siloing is something that happens almost naturally in organizations. It's not something that someone imposes, they just appear. A siloed work environment doesn't scream out at you. You might go to human resources, and everybody there will be working well, and they will do most of their communication internally within that silo. Now, in some functional areas, that's not particularly negative, a finance or an HR. But if you have parts that are dependent upon interacting, the people who develop products with the people who sell those products, for example. We were working with Scotts Miracle-Gro, and the people who were selling were complaining that they weren't getting the products that the customers wanted. and yet they weren't connected with the people who were developing the products. And so the silos neither were evil or trying to do the wrong thing, but because information stayed inside, they didn't have deep relationships where they automatically exchanged a consciousness about the marketplace. They became extraordinarily inefficient. But silos can have consequences far more serious than inefficiency. In 2024, my team was asked by the North Carolina Emergency Management Agency to evaluate the response to Hurricane Helene. The storm ravaged the state. Thousands of people were left stranded without power or food for days as officials scrambled to help them. In North Carolina alone, 107 people died before it was over. It was the deadliest disaster in the state's modern history. We found the state hadn't adapted to the pace of change. In this case, climate change. Storms were faster and more unpredictable than ever. The state's methods of communication could not keep pace. People needed to get updates on what's happening, but the cell service goes down, the electricity goes down, the internet is lost. People down the chain of command literally couldn't communicate with each other. The state should have had backup radio systems in place in case that happened. They didn't. That communication breakdown can be seen as a metaphor for the siloed communication between the North Carolina agencies. The Department of Public Health wasn't talking to the Department of Emergency Management, which wasn't talking to the Department of Public Works. So to be better prepared for the next natural disaster, we showed the team how to foster communications between departments and decentralize decision-making. It was time to break down the walls the way I'd done in Iraq. I had grown up in JSOC, but when I became the commanding general, the silos became my problem. I had the organizations that were normally part of JSOC, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the Rangers, some aviation units, some intelligence units. And then, as we form this task force that's broader than the military, we get the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence, National Security Agency, FBI, Department of Treasury. We need the span of their capabilities because there were things that each organization brought that the others didn't. We also needed the scale that putting them all together gave us. We could create a bigger, more effective machine. The challenge was to get them all to work together. The SEALs hated Delta Force because they were theoretically co-equal, but Delta Force was more highly regarded. People would look at the Rangers and we had austere haircuts and very disciplined and younger. So people had a tendency to look down at the Rangers. Aviators were viewed as weak. When everybody else is living in a tent, they're living in a hotel. People come with their stereotypes, and you start the interaction with a deficit of trust. You've seen this in the movies. They start the movie, nobody trusts anybody.
I mean, where's the sense of risking the lives of the 8 of us to save one guy?
20 degrees. Anybody want to answer that?
By the end of the movie, because of this shared hardship, they all trust each other. You can't afford that because you've got to be ready before the crisis occurs. So how do you get these entities to work together? What I learned is you have to manufacture the trust. We thought the best way to do that was to take selected operators, individuals, take them out of, for example, SEAL Team 6, and put them over in Delta Force for 4 months. Now, they weren't just visitors, they were embedded into a troop, and they operated with the organization during that period. As we got over there, they found they could fit in much quicker than people thought. Many of the skills and the temperaments of the organization were actually very similar. But also, when that individual came back to the home organization, people would say, wasn't being over there with those guys terrible? And they go, no, they're actually just like we are. And also, you now had some people who knew people in the other organizations, so you could pick up the phone. You wouldn't call the SEALs, you called the person you knew, and then you could branch out from there. Or in an embassy in Syria, we have an operator who's a Delta Force operator. Every day, that operator can give the ambassador insights into the counterterrorist fight that he couldn't get any other way. So again, you're building up this reservoir of trust.
So now, with decision-making pushed down and silos crumbling, people were thinking horizontally instead of vertically.
Yeah, I understand. Not all organizations are like the military, and you can't take people from one and put them for several months in another part of your organization. Although, as much as you can do cross-training like that, it's of great value. But there are other things that can be done, like creating cross-functional teams for certain tasks. You're going to have a task that you want to do. It takes a diverse set of capabilities in the organization. Create a team that exists for a period of time to do that task. Now, a word of caution to everyone. If you create those teams, initially people will be skeptical. If they're sent over to be on a team, they want to know if they've been sent to purgatory and this is bad for their career. They also want to know, if I'm sent on a team for an initiative and the initiative doesn't work, is that now going to be damaging to my career? So you have to tackle that up front. You have to say, first, you going over is a good sign because you want leaders to send their best people, not their worst. And the second is a significant percentage of things we try to do will fail. If you're not failing enough, you're not trying enough. So people need clear communication that says, if we send you to go try to do this, and you don't succeed, as long as the effort was worthy of the importance of the task, that's a positive experience. And we learn an awful lot, both organization and individually, from things that don't work. I would encourage people to take the initiative yourself and get to know people in other departments. We tend to focus on our own teams, but in reality, all of us should be able to name priorities for another team because all of us interconnect. If you can't name a priority for another team, it's probably a pretty good indicator you're siloed. So make it an effort. Invite people out that are in another group. Encourage regular communication and socialization between teams. You'd be surprised just little things you do that create that linkage carry for a very long time. Yeah, remote work is a real challenge, but it's a reality as well. There should be some interactions that are just one-on-one, and they should be almost entirely social. Just call somebody on Team or Zoom and just ask them about their hunting trip the week before. Just make that kind of a connection. Every time you have a meeting, spend the first 4 or 5 minutes telling somebody or the group something personal about what you're doing. We're not automatons, we're human beings that matter. People say, I've got my life and then I've got this separate thing, which is my job. I reject that. Your life is your life. And you intersect those and you'll find out you spend your most energetic hours alive, probably, at work. Often the relationships you build, the friendships that you build, will last a lifetime.
And those relationships across silos are more important than ever. That's because in today's rapidly changing business environment, silos can be a lethal malady to have.
Today, everything's changing moment to moment. And that change may first be detected in one part of the organization. And if part of the organization adapts, but the rest doesn't, you still have an ineffective response. Let me give you an example.
In 2024,
Pfizer came to us because they wanted to roll out an AI initiative with the goal of saving the company $1 billion a year. Crucial to this effort would be information technology, the IT team. The first hurdle, people didn't think of IT as a department that should be leading them anywhere. Like most of us, employees thought of the IT department as where you go when you needed technical help. That's completely flipped. Now IT is the trunk of the tree. The core of the organization must be digitally based. It's how information flows, it's how action occurs, it's how sales occur, which means that IT can no longer be a siloed entity of people who are focused on technology. You have to speak IT because they are so integrated and so codependent. The first step we took was to combat complexity with simplification. We got everyone to agree with the language that we'd use to refer to each part of the AI initiative. This was key, and it can be duplicated wherever you work. Make sure your team speak the same language. Agree on terminology. Having a shared language is one of the critical things about simplifying how you operate. It means that people have a shared view, again, shared consciousness. In the case of Pfizer, we did a number of basic changes to help them look at their data differently. The IT group deployed simple software that everyone in the company could use to access and input OKRs, objectives and key results. And then suddenly everybody could see where everybody else's progress on the project was. By the end of the second quarter, dozens of teams were working together. $150 million had been saved, with employees amazed at the increased efficiency. The silos were coming down.
Devise ways for people from different teams to work together. Encourage regular communication and socialization between teams. Name a priority for another team. If you can't, that means you're siloed. When it comes to personal experience with tearing down silos, the example I'm most proud of is from my time in Iraq. When I first took command, we were doing 4 operations a month or 1 a week. By 2006, we're up to 10 a night. Compare that to intelligence in garbage bags that took weeks if they were ever digested, and now we're literally digesting them in minutes and executing based upon that knowledge. It was not perfect, but at that point, we'd created a different kind of organization. We'd created a team of teams. Then in June 2006, everything we built would be tested against our most wanted target, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq. By 2006, our task force and our system had gotten so good that I was utterly confident we'd get Abu Musab al-Zarqawi fairly soon. All he had to do was make one mistake. That mistake came in June 2006. We had captured a group of people, one of whom had indicated that he potentially knew Zarqawi's spiritual advisor. We started watching the spiritual advisor's helm, and we watched the spiritual advisor get in a vehicle and start to leave the city. We had anticipated him going west, but he went north to this small town near a place called Bakaba and up to a series of houses. And as we're watching, an individual comes out of the house and he's dressed in all black. And we've got a predator above so we can see him in full motion video. We immediately said, that's Zarqawi. We see him, we got him in our sights. The atmosphere was electric. Everybody's focused. We have a squadron of operators down in Baghdad with helicopters waiting. What we want to do is launch a mission to capture him alive. And then we get word that one of the helicopters is broken, so the force wouldn't get there as quickly as we had planned it to. He's going to slip through our fingers yet again. This was the moment of truth for everything we'd built. Would the team of teams hold together under ultimate pressure? There was a task force commander between me and that force that was launching. He came to me and said, I want to drop a bomb. I said, no, we can't do that. I don't want to do that. We're going to capture this guy. He said, sir, it's getting dark. There's the chance he's going to get away. Sometimes it's really hard to keep what I call an eyes-on, hands-off approach. One of the core tenets of the team of teams model is really based on trust. And so when you are in a moment when things have to happen and you've already shared all the information that you can, you've empowered people with both the authority and the responsibility and the information they need to do the job, you need to let them do it. And so I said, okay. We were able to drop 2 bombs onto the house and destroy it. And we brought his body back. If we think of risk, we can think of an analogy to the human immune system, which is actually a miracle, because every day scientists think we are exposed to about 15,000 threats that ingested or touch our bodies could make us sick or kill us. And yet the human immune system is so good at detecting threats, assessing how dangerous that threat is, dealing with the threat, but also learning from that process. Businesses need a risk immune system that can protect businesses the way our bodies protect us. In the case of a risk immune system, there are 10 factors
that I would argue make up the ability or effectiveness of that risk immune system. We've already talked about leadership, communication, a strong and simple narrative, and a structure that tears down silos. Now, let's tackle the others.
We've seen how technology connects teams. Now let's explore how it can detect threats.
In today's world, technology is one of our greatest assets to identify threats.
It can identify changes in the marketplace,
Changes in consumer preferences, changes in supply chain, trends in people performance, trends in demography, all the things that you need to have a finger on the pulse of, but are difficult. Technology can give us additional sensors throughout our organization that inform us. Consistently use and update data and technology to assess risk.
but here's the critical lesson. Whether it's AI, data analytics, or any other technology, these tools should inform your decisions, never replace your judgment.
You should always question whether the data you receive, even from your own analytics department, is actually foolproof. It never is. When I think of data, the first thing I do is I put it against a common sense test. If that simply doesn't make sense to me, then I question that data. Back in my career, in the counterterrorist world, they would bring me information about activities of the enemy, particularly cumulative activities, and you'd at first look at that and say, okay, and then you go, wait a minute, that's not actually what I'm seeing. That's not actually what I'm feeling. There's got to be something wrong in either how we're measuring this data or how we're reporting it. Sometimes there's mistakes with the data. Sometimes it's the interpretation, because often people will take data and they will put it on a PowerPoint slide, and by the time you see it, it's not actually the data. It is, in fact, someone's interpretation of it. So feel free, in fact, feel responsible that you have to question it.
Let me give you a chilling example of how important this is.
Back in 1983, the Cold War was at one of its most tense periods, and a lieutenant colonel in the Russian military arguably saved the world from nuclear Armageddon. Most of us never heard of him. Stanislav Petrov. He was in one of the response cells in the Soviet system that tracked incoming threats and then transmitted that to another location for a decision to do a counterstrike against the United States. And suddenly they receive an alert that 5 nuclear missiles have been launched from the United States. The normal response would be to go to Moscow, inform them that we have an incoming American attack, and to prepare a counterstrike. But Petrov didn't do that. While people in his center watched him, he decided to delay responding, to delay informing his superiors. And he did that because he had the nagging feeling this just wasn't right. And he started with the fact it was a new computer system. And so he wasn't as comfortable with its reliability as he might be. The other part was human common sense. He says if the United States was going to launch a first strike unexpectedly, they wouldn't shoot 5 missiles. They'd shoot 500. It didn't make sense to him, so he questioned the technology, and he turned out to be right. It turned out to be some kind of sunspots or something that had caused the computer system to indicate a nuclear launch. Had it gone to the counterstrike decision cell, they might have ordered Russian missiles to shoot. Petrov, with his natural intuition, questioned the technology of the day. I'd urge you to have the same care with artificial intelligence. There's not the ability to understand in real time the logic chain that the artificial intelligence is using. So we have the danger of looking at this black box. It sees a threat, it starts to respond, and we're not really comfortable second guessing it, because if we get it wrong either way, we could have a bad outcome. Your human intuition matters. It's still an important part of this entire process, maybe more than ever. So if you are in a moment where in your company and data tells you something, but it just doesn't seem right, question it. Talk to other people. That's one of the important things we as people add. Of course, the question arises, is AI a threat to your business and to civilization? And the answer is, of course it is. Incorrectly used, It can have tremendous negative impacts. It can threaten the very quality of your understanding of your information because it processes things in a way we have a difficult time fully understanding. But also, it can be a threat if your competitors leverage it effectively and you don't. They will likely win. So actually, artificial intelligence is both a threat and an opportunity. It's one of those things we are going to have to use, but we're going to have to use it thoughtfully and effectively. And AI can also be a lot of fun.
Another component in the risk immune system is understanding how bias blinds us to real threats.
Because they think that after the fight, you're going to leave again. In the military, when we try to deceive our enemies on what we are going to do, we start with a plan based upon what they think we are going to do. What's their bias? What are they prepared to expect or believe about us? We reinforce that, and then we do something different. The challenge in ourselves is we are biased about everything. When we get data, when we get options, there's something in us, in our experience, it's not intentional, that causes us to think or interpret a certain way. We need to understand that phenomenon. Bias can be especially uniform when a group of like-minded people get together. It can happen in every organization. And sometimes you have to have people who are around who pressure test or question assumptions, decisions that are made. Maybe the most famous kind of bias is confirmation bias. It's when you get information that meets your expectations or your biases. It reinforces what you already want to believe. That information comes in and you go, aha, I was right after all. And it makes you even more strongly a believer in that particular assumption.
Weapons of mass destruction are controlled by a murderous tyrant.
The Iraq War, which began in 2003, is a great example of confirmation bias. There were a number of planners who had some assumptions and beliefs about the situation in Iraq and what would happen if there was an intervention against Saddam Hussein. They got some information in about weapons of mass destruction, which was incomplete information, but it confirmed some of their assumptions. They also had expatriates, Iraqis who had moved to the United States and Europe, who were adding additional information, which also was flawed. But it confirmed the view that those planners wanted to have. And so the plan was put together on a failed foundation.
So how can you combat bias? Well, one way is through red team exercises.
Red team exercises are a great way to combat bias. What you do is you get a group of people who are tasked to act as outside pressure on the plan. They look at the plan and they try to find a way to defeat it or undercut it. And because they didn't develop the plan, they feel more free intellectually to come and poke holes in it.
Let me give you a personal example.
I was put on the board of Deutsche Bank USA. I was the only non-banker on the board, and so I was much more ignorant of banking than anyone else. But I became kind of an informal red team, because I would ask questions that to me sounded stupid. But then we'd go into the hallway between breaks in the meeting, and bankers would come up to me and they go, good question. And so sometimes you've got to be a step away from the operation and sometimes the expertise of what is happening to be able to ask those questions. It's probably best not to red team until you're pretty along in your planning, because they've got to have something to actually oppose to give a substance to it. As a product leader or any leader, you should test your assumptions because you'll fall in love with them. You'll feel comfortable with them, and you need to find where they might be flawed. If an organization isn't honest with itself and inside itself, it can never truly be effective because people go in directions that may seem like a good idea, but some part of the organization knows it's guaranteed to fail. And so you've got to have the ability for people to raise those flags. We have an exercise we take people through sometimes called a pre-mortem. And what you do is you do all your planning for something you're going to execute, but before you execute, you get people together and you say, okay, we're going to have a conversation based on the assumption that this failed. Now let's go through and identify what caused us to fail. You've got to create an environment in which people in that room can go, you know, I was worried about this, or I was worried about that. I think we don't have enough resource here. Whatever it is, you're trying to tease those out before the failure actually occurs. And it's amazing because you can modify the plan. You can have a pre-mortem and you can have a post-mortem. We would call it an after-action review in the military. It's important to do it for successes and failures, because often what'll happen with a success is it'll go very well, but it turns out it was just absolute dumb luck. It was a stupid idea, it was poorly executed, but you got lucky. And it's important to know that, because often we walk away thinking, nope, it was a brilliant decision, well done. Diversity is another component of the system that I believe in. When I talk about diversity, people tend to think strictly of sex, race, or religion. I think more broadly. If you get 20 U.S. Army colonels in the room, you may get different races, you may have male and female. The dominant gene is they are Army colonels. They've all spent about 20 years in the Army, and they're going to reflect that experience. If everybody's the same, you'll always get the same answer. If you want real diversity, you've got to have diversity of perspectives, life journeys, expertise, different opinions. And what that does, it allows you to see something circumspectly from all the angles, almost like you'd view a diamond from every viewpoint. It's really important to bring in people who don't agree with you. And they can be very irritating. If you have that person in the room who always is poking holes, they might just be a pain, but they might also be really valuable, because if their observations are well-intentioned, if they are trying to make the organization better, then their diversity of perspective is something you just gotta have.
Now let me show you what happens when organizations fail to act on what their risk immune system is telling them, especially when it comes to adaptability, action, and timing.
Adaptability is our willingness to respond when faced with a threat. Action is our capacity to respond to it. And timing means acting when the moment is right. Let's use a famous example to illustrate each of these concepts. One of the most familiar and favorite for me is the fall of Blockbuster. Let me first remind people what Blockbuster was for my generation.
It was kind of comforting. It was a successful national chain that rented movies, first VHS and then DVDs.
It always smelled like popcorn. They had 9,000 locations, and we just took Blockbuster as a utility. But then the market changed, because Netflix came up with the ability to mail DVDs. It was just a business model change, but Netflix was always looking ahead. Well, Blockbuster was too arrogant to assume that this upstart that was mailing DVDs was going to displace them, because they had 9,000 locations.
And so when Netflix offered to sell themselves to Blockbuster in 2000,
for just $50 million, the Netflix team was wearing Hawaiian shirts, reportedly, and Blockbuster just almost dismissed them out of hand. And of course, in a few years, Blockbuster realized the error of their ways. They tried to pivot and catch up, but they did it imperfectly. And of course, that was a fatal move. 10 years later, DVDs were history. Blockbuster was bankrupt. And today, Netflix is worth $500 billion. Blockbuster is a great example of misjudging risk, because at least in the short term around the Netflix offer, they did nothing. And you say, well, how is that risky? If I'm not doing anything, I'm not putting myself at risk. Not acting can be the greatest risk of all. Now let's talk about a company showing strong adaptability, smart action, and good timing. And talk about when Facebook bought Instagram. Facebook, of course, was preeminent in the early days of social media. And then as new platforms started to arrive, they decided to create an Instagram equivalent. But they quickly realized they couldn't. At least they couldn't create one as popular or as effective as Instagram. So they made the decision to spend a ton of money to buy Instagram and bring it into Facebook. And of course, whenever you spend money in the billions, then people are going to question that decision. But the reality is the payoff has been extraordinary. Zuckerberg was smart enough to realize that his offering wasn't developing itself as effectively as the competition, and he wasn't likely to win with it. Admit reality and act on that. Strong adaptability means asking questions like, what assumptions are we making that might no longer be true? And is our approach still working, or does it need to evolve? If your analysis shows that the potential benefits outweigh the potential risks, take action. Let me give you an example from my career. In the late spring of 2005, I was asked by the four-star commander in Iraq if my counterterrorist force would become the main effort and it would move much of our effort out to western Iraq along the Syrian border. What it meant was I was going to need more of my force in Iraq to conduct that mission. Our organization was made up of threes. There were 3 squadrons in Delta Force, 3 squadrons in SEAL Team 6, 3 range battalions, and we rotated one into the fight, one back on alert, and the other preparing and training. Well, I felt like we couldn't do the mission we'd been asked with 1/3 of the force. So I made the decision to surge 2/3 of the force into the fight. Now, that we knew up front was unsustainable because we fought every night. And so people could only keep that up for a certain period of time. And right after I made the decision and we started to deploy forces, we also had a spike in casualties. And in the Special Operating Forces, it takes about a decade to create an operator. So the impact of casualties is much greater than it would be in a conventional force. So I was risking breaking the nation's counterterrorism force. I was gambling money that basically wasn't mine to put at risk. But I felt it was so important. We felt this was the critical inflection moment. And it may seem irresponsible, but in retrospect and in the moment, I thought that not doing that was a greater risk to the overall mission. And by the end of that period, we had essentially wrested control of that critical ground away from Al-Qaeda. What I want people to think about risk is you have to be careful and intentional, but you also have to be decisive. You have to realize that acting or not acting is a decision. When a business or any organization plays not to lose, they often find that they do lose. So you've got to play to win. You've got to accept a certain amount of risk because staying in one place is almost certainly fatal. Now let's talk through your action items. Consistently use and update data and technology to assess risk. If you're pursuing an idea with high-stakes ramifications, red team it first. Then test your assumptions to see if they're correct. Conduct a pre-mortem and a post-mortem. Find the naysayers, the devil's advocates, and welcome their feedback, even if you don't agree with it. Character, I think, is often misunderstood, or at least interpreted differently. I think of character as a mathematical equation. It's convictions times discipline. So even if I have great character through my convictions, if I don't have the discipline to live to it, it's zero. Let's talk about discipline first. Some people just get lucky, dumb luck, they stand there and get on the up elevator. But most people have to be disciplined in the pursuit of what they want to become. Think of the great lawyers you know, the great teachers you know, the great anything you know. Typically, they've worked really hard at it, and working really hard always involves discipline. Self-discipline is critical in the conduct of character because we may have all these ideas on the character we want to display and reflect, but if we don't have the personal self-discipline to live up to that, what we'll do is we'll constantly find ourselves acting on a lower plane than we think our values are. When I was younger, I wasn't nearly as disciplined as I should have been. And when I entered West Point at age 17, I thought of the academy as simply a way station you went through en route to be a soldier in the United States Army. I didn't take West Point very seriously, and so we had this clash of wills.
As you remember, I got into a lot of trouble my first year there. I needed discipline. But things turned around the next fall during my very first meeting with our new tactical officer. I sat down with him and he goes,
I think your last 2 years at the academy are going to be good and you're going to be a great Army officer. And I said, well, I got to ask, you've seen my record, right? He pointed out that what it takes to be a good cadet and the measures of success aren't the same as being a good Army officer. The things that I had been weak at, both academically and behavior, were entirely within my power to control. Nobody was doing it to me. All I had to do is say stop and change direction. He believed that I could and would do that. almost on a dime, he changed my attitude, he changed my thought about what I was going to be for the rest of my time at West Point and then in the Army. I did better academically. I started dating a girl for my last 2 years. I've now been married to her for 48 years. And the importance of that relationship and her was another forcing function. And I found that if I didn't misbehave, I was allowed to have more weekend passes. I could spend more time with her. And so as I went forward, I started to develop discipline that I had just not shown before. The session I had with that officer had such a change on my attitude in many ways. It was a brilliant leadership move, and I still revere him. The takeaway for me is that anyone can cultivate self-discipline. I got helped by the structure of West Point. I got helped by some leaders around me. I got helped by some people that I cared about. But at the end of the day, you can learn it. If somebody doesn't have good values or doesn't have the skills, that's a separate issue. But many people have an issue with attitude. And sometimes there are factors in their life that you don't know about. And if you can find out about them, you can also help improve those in a way that you'll get value out of people that you might have otherwise written off. Someday, I hope to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and someone of bad character gets the exact same headstone I do. And the reality is, there's no prize for character at the end of your life, except the self-satisfaction and maybe the respect of people that you care about, who reflect the fact that your character was something that was of value to society. Character can be complicated. Many times in life we have convictions we believe in, and most of the time we have discipline to live to them, but we all fail some of the time. Almost every day there's something that I do or fail to do that I'm disappointed with. How do we respond to that? Do we let the lower standard become the new standard of our character? Or do we look ourselves in the mirror and say, tomorrow I'll do better? I probably won't do perfect, but I'll do better. One of the things I think we've allowed to erode in recent years is the fact that there used to be norms in society and expectations that we would look at people, and if they didn't live to a certain level of character, they would at least be criticized for it. There would be some pressures. Now, people weren't perfect. There were things that were going on that were wrong, but there were societal pressures to pull people to a higher plane. Now we give them our social media likes, we give them our money, we give them our votes, and we accept a weaker version of character than we know we want. And so the agency or responsibility is on us. If we don't demand greater character of ourselves or demand greater character of the people around us, we won't get it. I think the values that matter most to me are integrity, loyalty, and respect for others. Those are sort of the core. Like most of us, I will push back if someone tries to get me to compromise my values. It's easy when you're in a cool, dry place, not really under pressure. It's much harder when you're in a position where you feel the stress. Maybe you're in a business environment and you really want the new job or the promotion, or you want to make more money, or whatever it is you're seeking. And there's an awful lot of power in peer pressure. There's extraordinary pressure in the Oval Office. When you sit in the Oval Office, the President of the United States has home field advantage. And if he asks you to do something or asks your opinion, there's this pressure to want to say what the President of the United States wants to hear. That's when you have to step back and say, no, I was brought here to give my honest opinion about something that I hopefully have expertise about. And that's where we've got to become comfortable with being strong enough to do what we know is right, even under significant pressure. I was on the board of directors of a company that had a facility down near the Gulf of Mexico. When the oil crisis occurred in 2010, the Deepwater Horizon, there was an area that was defined as eligible to apply for economic restitution for damages that were incurred by businesses. The business we had the ability to apply for about $250 million. And the CEO at a board meeting, I was one of the directors, he described this situation and he says, we are not going to apply for it because we didn't have any damage. And one of the board members started pressuring him saying, no, you have to apply. You have a fiduciary duty to the stockholders to apply for this money because it's legal. You don't have to prove the damage. You can get this $250 million, and therefore you have a responsibility to shareholders and to the firm to do it. The CEO pushed back and said, I'm not going to do it because there will be reputational risk if people find out we took money that we weren't really morally entitled to. And I, of course, was very much against taking it. In between that board meeting and the next board meeting, there were a couple calls from that director, and the CEO was flipped, and they took the money. And I left the board. There are so many cases where someone can make a counter-argument that on its surface seems convincing, but there are some things that are wrong no matter where they fall. That's where you've got to be honest with yourself. And you've got to be able to look at yourself and say, no, I'm not going to go along. I hope people will set ethical lines for themselves, even at work, but I also hope organizations will help them do it. Ask yourself, what lines are you unwilling to cross? The most important time to do what's right is when it's difficult. Everything I'd learned about character and discipline would be tested in the most difficult assignment of my career. In the summer of 2009, I took command of all coalition forces in Afghanistan and was promoted to 4-star general for that job. It was an extraordinarily difficult assignment. The big challenge in Afghanistan was dealing with the 46 nations of the coalition, the difficulties of a counterinsurgency, the reality that the American political electorate had sort of moved on from supporting the war in Afghanistan. So my challenge was to turn the situation around. It was like a corporation that was failing. To build support for the mission, we opened our doors to the media. One of the decisions that was made was to embed a Rolling Stone reporter to write a story about my command team. When it was published, the title of the story was The Runaway General, which, as soon as you see the title, is problematic. The story says that the temper, the mood in my command team was such that it was dismissive of our civilian leadership and a locker room sort of mentality. I don't think the story was accurate or fair, but I'm probably not the most unbiased observer of it. Well, I've had lots of lapses of judgment in my life, but in this particular incident, one of the things which I feel good about is I don't believe I did the things that the article reflects. The story came out, and I instantly knew what the impact would be. And I instantly knew that I would accept responsibility for it because I was in command. So I prepared my resignation and flew back to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president.
Even though I didn't believe I was disloyal to the president or the mission, I never regretted offering my resignation. I took responsibility.
Leaders are responsible for the actions of their subordinates, one, because they create the conditions, but second, because they are leaders. If the organization is wildly successful, leaders get credit. If the organization makes mistakes or fails, leaders have to accept responsibility, period. When I think back about submitting my resignation, in the moment it was very painful. It seemed like the worst thing I could have imagined. I didn't know what I'm supposed to do next. I hadn't been home in a year. And suddenly I'm not a soldier. I'm not in command. I'm not any of the things I was, at least in my mind. The loss of identity and the sense of embarrassment.
Today I accepted General Stanley McChrystal's resignation.
And suddenly the combination of everything I was being, in my mind, erased.
And as difficult as it is to lose General McChrystal, I believe that it is the right decision for our national security.
And the humiliation of being on the news every few minutes, and the idea that, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I'm going to go around and be this disgraced general. I contemplated suicide, and I'm not a suicidal person. I just thought, what if I could just end the pain right away? And in reality, you end the pain by working through the pain. If you ever have a gift from a failure, it's an impetus to do something different. It sort of wipes the whiteboard clean. It says, okay, you did all this stuff. Oh, that was great. Now we're going to start again. You're not starting at the bottom. You're not starting with nothing. You've got all you've become. You've got your discipline. You've got your values. You've got the experience you've gained. You've got all these tools which you can now take to whatever you want to do. I was 55 years old, about to be 56, and it provided me both the time in life, but also the impetus and the motivation to do something different, to start a new business, to go in new directions. I'm now part of this incredible company that I love. I had the experience teaching at Yale. I've written 5 books. I've got 3 granddaughters. All these things that I didn't have in my life, and a lot of people and relationships I didn't have, I now have. And so the second chapter is one I'm so glad I didn't miss.
What I learned from the experience
Is don't think about the past. Be proud of what you did. Instead, go forward, because you could do something about that. Build a daily habit that requires restraint and intention. Decide today on an element of self-discipline that you will turn into a habit. Name some of your convictions. How might you be tempted to compromise them at work? How can you handle that? And when you fail as a leader, you must own the outcome. You know, I once had a boss who taught me that you can fail without being a failure. And if you fail a lot, you still aren't a failure unless you quit. Endings aren't really the end. They're an opportunity for you to move forward. You can recover because it's up to you. We've always got another day. We got something we can do. We got some contribution we can make. Why would we give that up?